almost 2 years ago, we initiated our journal. So, in this, we started as a mostly domestic journal, so it was in Russian, but now we publish papers also in English, and so it is not indexed, universally recognized and so on, databases, but still you may consider that we will be very happy if you just tell your colleagues that there is something developing in Russia.
What's the title of the
it's Philosophy of Religion, Analytic Researches.
Just for you.
So there are many more copies in room 410, and please you may take and just look through. And here, just to make a first acquaintance, and perhaps Vladimir will tell something more about it.
Well, I have one small thing, but one of the peculiarities of this journal is its strictly thematic nature. That each two issues are dealing with one topic in all its rubrics. We begin with philosophy and mystical experience, continued with religion and revelation. Now we are publishing 2 issues on religion and cultural diversity, and the next 2 issues will be dedicated to religion and metaphysics.
Okay.
So we invite all the present for collaboration.
Of course, not all of you reads and writes in Russian, but you can send your articles in English. So we can begin, I think. And now I ask you, don't sleep after lunch. I know it's hard, but we should. So the paper of Sleptsova is the new atheism self-contradictory worldview. So Valeria, please.
Let's start. So dear colleagues, good afternoon. I hope you enjoy this conference. What about my presentation? Okay. By the term new atheists, here I will understand, in this paper I will understand, 4 scientists and public figures who have raised the theme of negative influence of religion on modern civilization. Despite of the fact that the name is rather vague, it is often questioned by researchers. I think it is reasonable to dwell on it, albeit with a few reservations. In 2004, Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith, came out. The publication of that book is considered by researchers at the date of emergence of the new atheism. In November 2006, Gary Wolf, who is a journalist of White magazine, American journal, for the first time called Harris, Dennett and Dawkins new atheists in his article Church of Unbelievers. After that, some people like Victor Stranger, Jen McRae, John Loftus, Greta Christina, Peter Bogasan, etc. Began to position themselves as new atheists or as followers of new atheism. I believe, and in this case I share point of majority of researchers, that the name New Atheism is bad term for description of this phenomenon. Not only researchers, but some of the New Atheists themselves do not always agree with this name. According to self-designation of Hitchens, for example, he is not so much an atheist as an anti-theist. In defining the term anti-theism, some researchers stress radical rejection by its followers of any religion and belief in God or gods, or rejection of belief in the existence of God. Reza Aslan and some another researchers distinguishes between atheism and anti-theism as follows. If an atheist believes that God doesn't exist, then the anti-theist rejects the very idea of religious faith. Of course, one of the characteristic features of the New Atheism is the rejection of religious faith as such. However, it is hardly advisable to single out anti-theism on this basis. The sequence of denial of religion faith, as well as the degree of sharpness of this denial, seems to me more indicative criterion for determining anti-theism. But according to this criterion, it is impossible to call the rest of the New Atheists, except Christopher Hitchens, anti-theists. So, Sam Harris does not consider Buddhism to be a religion in Western world sense. And also, according to Harris, in Buddhism, much remains incomprehensible and much seems implausible. Intellectual honesty requires admitting that as a system of spiritual instruction, it is much higher than other religions. Note, however, that Harris does not provide the definition of religion. Therefore, it is unclear exactly the features of Buddhism, according to Harris, make Buddhism ethical system distinguished from Western religions. Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett are also avoiding a critical analysis of Buddhism, also for different reasons. Dennett argues that he does not know enough about other religions, except Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, to write about them with confidence. Richard Dawkins agrees with Sam Harris that Buddhism is not a religion but an ethical system. Hitchens, in his attitude to Buddhism, acts as consistent anti-theist. He noted in the religions of the East the same properties that are inherent in the religions of the West. They are inhumanity and aggressiveness. Richard Dawkins, comprehending the question of the place of his own position among other positions, characterized himself as essentially an atheist, opposing given ideological position to a convinced atheist who knows that there is no God, just as the theist knows that there is a God. He thinks that he can't know with absolute precision, but he believes that the probability of the existence of God is very small, and he lives in belief that there is no God. Considering that the New Atheism had a tendency to freedom in use philosophical categories and terms, it is very problematic to classify this position of representatives of the New Atheism. In my opinion, in the attempt of Richard Dawkins to demarcate the concepts of agnosticism from atheism, he does not achieve much success. Daniel Dennett defines himself as an atheist. He regards as an atheist every human being who holds sacred anything but any kind of person he could pray to or consider to be an appropriate recipient of gratitude. Sam Harris emphasized his highly negative attitude to the terms atheism and your atheism. Such names, in his opinion, are just labels that tie into outreach and irrelevant to philosophy. Harris suggested using descriptive definitions such as rationality, intelligence, and intellectual integrity to account phenomena like atheism. Despite all the difficulties with the terminology mentioned above, we will use the term new atheism in relation to these four causes, since despite all the criticism, it has already been adopted and is used in the research literature. New atheists adopt a position of naturalistic worldview, where naturalism means that everything everyone has observed or claimed to observe is the product of fundamentally mindless arrangements and interaction of matter energy in space-time, leaving no sufficient reason to believe that anything else exists. Some basic principles of the new atheism are denial of supernatural reality or naturalism, assertion that religious belief is irrational, and moral realism, assertion that ethical propositions may be true or false. Another principal features of the new atheism is its postulate about absolute rationality of naturalistic worldview. We will consider some ideas of the new atheism about good and bad reasons for believing to decide is a true postulate. Now let me demonstrate in more detail good and bad reasons for belief in the opinion of the new atheists. According to Harris, religious faith is one of the varieties of human beliefs that comprehend the world and act in and interact with the world and society. Believing a given proposition is a matter of belief that faithfully represents some state of the world. Beliefs of a human being are representations of the world. Therefore, the main characteristics that Harris attributes to the beliefs are logical consistency and ability to induce to action in accordance with them. At the same time, Harris emphasized that believing the statement of the natural sciences, for example, the statement about chemical composition of water, as well as believing statements formed as a result of immediate perception by using the senses are different kinds of belief that believing in the existence of God. Realizing that our worldview is shaped under the influence of authority, Harris stressed that nevertheless the naturalistic worldview is the most correct of all because it relies in observation and experiment. Despite the fact that Harris strongly emphasized the importance of experiment and observation of the formation of a correct worldview, he nevertheless don't deny the importance of such human ability as intuition, indicating that it is not true to oppose it to reason because the mind is imbued with intuition. Hitler's book is the least theoretical of all books of the new atheists. There are a lot of abuses of believers and religion, but he does not even try to substantiate his reasoning with anything other than historical anecdotes. He opposes faith and reason as bad and good things without any proofs of his position. Dennett distinguished two types of beliefs, first-order beliefs and second-order beliefs. First-order beliefs like belief in democracy, belief in integrity of scientific procedures, metaphysical beliefs, belief in free will, belief in God. Second-order beliefs, something like belief that something matters, belief in equality of all people regardless to their race. I think that this distinction is just confusing us. Then stressed that faith is characteristic of all areas of our life, for science to the same extent as for religion. However, the object of reasoning in science and religion is fundamentally different. Science speaks of the world as a noble object, and scientists understand the methods that produce this or that scientific result. religion is based on the fundamental unknowability of God. The experts in this area, Dennett means theologians and priests, also insist that they themselves cannot use their expertise to prove, even to one another, that they know what they're talking about. Then separated the scientific faith and religious faith on some pragmatic basis. Scientific faith that have driven the changes in concepts in physics was tidal wave of exclusively detailed positive results, the sort of borne-out predictions. I'm sorry. In accordance with Dawkins' idea, there is good and bad reasons for believing some statements. All our scientific knowledge is grounded on the evidence. There is a good reason for believing. Evidence is a result of observing with your own organs and senses, or it is a result of observing using instruments like microscope, telescope, etc. However, besides good reasons for believing, there are also three bad ones: their tradition, authority, and revelation. Dawkins thinks that these grounds for belief are contrary to the evidence. Tradition means that people believe things simply because people have believed the same thing over the centuries. Authority, as a reason for believing something, means believing in it because you are told to believe it by somebody important. We might think that science also has a belief on the basis of authority, but this is not so, inasmuch as, says Dawkins, scientists have seen the evidence and anyone is free to look carefully at the evidence whenever they want. Dawkins denied significance of revelation for formation of true beliefs, says that revelation is unjustified beliefs that religious people feel inside themselves. Let me come to some conclusions. Despite the fact that in relation of the faith, the position of new atheists are somewhat different in details, in general they are similar. Obviously, the new atheism, ignoring the long development of the epistemology of religion in the 20th to 21st centuries, reproduced the simplified model of Enlightenment evidentialism, because firstly, it proposes to accept finance as the basis of the formation of true knowledge. Secondly, it rejects religious experience as central. The new atheism claims that all true ideas derive from evidence. But this claim itself is not grounded on the evidence, it is rather a kind of deep conviction. It is grounded on the idea of benefit. There are good and bad grounds for belief. Good grounds are observation and experimentation. Science uses them, and religion based on the bad grounds. It's obvious that new atheists adhere to a pragmatic attitude in this case. According to the new atheism, good grounds lead to positive consequences and bad grounds lead to negative ones. Thus, scientific or naturalistic worldview is good and religion is bad. According ideas of the new atheism, bad worldview must be rejected. At the same time, new atheism completely ignores all positive consequences of religion or discards them as insignificant. But what then the criteria of the benefit? There is no answer in the box of new atheists. The new atheism chooses them arbitrarily. So, new atheists do not strive for an impartial objective, or at least a little fair considerations of religion. They only seek to create an image of the enemy. And this desire obviously is based not on rationality, but on those emotions that arose in this people as a result of the tragic events of September 11th, 2001. Finally, by using pragmatic attitude that was used by the new atheism itself, we will see if the new atheism leads to good or bad consequences. Obviously, the new atheism holds the views that make impossible any kind of productive dialogue with the believers. And this is clearly a bad consequence, thus new atheism must be rejected. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. So, colleagues, any questions? Please.
Well, thank you, Valeria. You make the picture of new atheism with strict dogmas. Furthermore, was on the slide at the beginning, no supra-natural reality, okay? Religious beliefs are irrational, but they advocate or they campaign for moral realism.
Yeah.
My question is, what is the scope of this moral realism? What are the ontological commitments of this moral realism? I raise the question because, to some extent, a commitment to moral realism could be a commitment to theism under another description. The description that God is goodness in itself, and that if there is a real reason for obeying certain moral laws, it's a way of being obliged toward some person, because there are no obligations toward atoms or physical realities, but only obligations toward persons. So, how can someone like Prokopio be a moral realist without this commitment to the God of enlightenment, the supreme reason being the source of moral order?
Yeah, I see. If you understand, if I understand you, so Dawkins or Dennett, they said about evolution as the basis of moral realism. They said that evolution is the main force that take us instruments for development of our moral. But Sam Harris, who is the first of new atheists, but first of new atheists, he is a very strange person because he thinks that there is no God, but there is something like Platonic world, but there is no God. Yeah, but just Platonic world, and from this Platonic world, we can form our moral statements. He said that moral statements something like mathematical statements. Yeah, something like this.
I don't want to repeat the formula of Dmitry Karamazov. If there is no God, everything is permitted. It's not exactly the book, but as far as I know, during the campaigns of atheism in London and in New York in the 2006 and 2008, Dawkins and Dennett had made advertisements, and two of them I remember on the buses in New York. You don't need to believe in God to be a moral or ethical person. And on in the street, why believe in God? Just be good for goodness sake. But conversely, you could say, okay, if you are committed to goodness as a norm as an obligatory, non-universal objective for moral conduct. You're committed to some kind of guidance, and there are many definitions from medieval scholastics who say the definition of the God is to be the good in itself, and the good communicates himself. So it seems to me that if you want to be a genuine new atheist, you have to weaken the commitments of moral realism, because if you don't, you will be committed to a Godhead under a moral description, even if you have not the description of a creator, of a benefactor, of a salvator, and so on.
So they don't think that this is a problem. Yeah, absolutely. They think that they can be true moral people without God. That's all about that's about. Yeah. I think so.
Maybe it's because of the rules or the laws, because in the USA and in other countries, I think you can be atheist, but you can be racist, for example. So for this reason, you atheists should be good people. They should have some ethical system. For this reason, without which they can't exist in our society.
I don't think so. I think that they have some incoherent ideas about this problems.
Thank you. Sorry, Veronica, please.
Okay. Thanks for your paper. I think it's a very interesting topic. I have one comment and follow-up question on Sam Harris. So he says that the naturalistic worldview is the most correct because it's based on observation and experiment. And I think this is fundamentally flawed, this position of Harris, that the naturalistic worldview cannot be proven to be true or false by any empirical evidence. A priori basic framework or claim, and you can be a metaphysical naturalist and do natural sciences, and you can be a theist and do natural sciences, but doing natural sciences is like the methodological naturalism. You don't accept as an explanation of supernatural reality, but it's two things. And with the means of science, you can't prove metaphysical naturalism to be true or wrong. So I want to know, would you agree that Harris is here a bit, that it's flawed?
So I share your point here, but here it is just the same thing. They are very their ideas are very incoherent. They don't think that there is a problem. They said science is good, naturalistic worldview is good, religion is bad. That's point. That's all. They don't reflect about their worldview. Absolutely no. And it is not their. It is not their problem. New atheism began as the answer to very particular deeds, to very particular deeds of very particular people. And it was ugly, but and they just wanted to say, oh, it's ugly. let's begin change something. But they don't want to to change something, I think, really, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. I enjoyed it very much. I was just thinking about these basic principles of New Atheism, and then I would say that you're right, but the problem is this, that those principles would old atheists also accept. See what I'm saying? What you need to develop in your paper is in what ways new atheists are different from old atheists. Because those three principles, I would say, they would also the old atheists accept. So the only reason why we should call it new is if there is something new there, right? So what you need to pinpoint down is the new things, and what we should think are the new things. So you're right, but then we don't have any ground for making a distinction between new and old. So that's, I have some suggestion about that, but you see what I'm saying? So you're right, but still we need a justification why we should call them new atheists.
Okay, thank you. At the beginning I said that it's just a very bad term for description this movement. Some people who position themselves as new atheists are not atheists. They are like Christians. They are anti-theists, maybe.
Yes.
But some researchers think that new intolerance for tolerance. That's principle new point, and repeat it again. It is absolutely that thing, absolutely that aim for these people. They wanted to struggle with something ugly that they do, that there is in the world, there was in the world. And the intolerance of tolerance is the really new in new atheism.
Yes. Yeah, because I think that's why, I mean, it's one thing to say that, well, some of these people don't self-identify as new atheists. Well, we don't have to care about that. We can just say, well, there are so many new elements in this form of atheism that we will call it new atheism, no matter whether you yourself self-identify as new atheist. As a scholar, you can do that. So, of course, we have to take something into account whether they care about it or not. But that is not a sufficient reason for rejecting the term. So I think there is reason to call it new, and you gave at least one reason there when you said that their intolerance towards tolerance is a new thing. I think in that article you're quoting, I think he picked out some other things. Their aggressiveness, their great impact. Whereas others, like I myself, would say what is new with them is that they're having what Massimo Piglucci called a scientific turn. They turn to science. It's science that makes a big difference. And Massimo Piglucci, who is an old atheist, he thinks that the best arguments against God's existence are philosophical arguments, and not scientific ones. So I think the way to improve the paper is to say, well, if you agree, then you can say, well, these are features that maybe not all of them have, but as a group we can see that there is at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 features that makes it worth calling them new atheists, because they have a different emphasis than the old ones. And I think that would be a good way of improving it. Or if you don't think there is anything new about new atheism, you argue for that and say, well, all of these, there's nothing new under the sun, you know.
Yeah.
Atheists are like atheists, always there.
honest. So please, Bogdan.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. And I've always thought that this new atheist movement is just some incoherent thing. But today I realized that it's based on interesting understanding of rationality, or pragmatic understanding of rationality. And I just wanted to clarify, how exactly do you reject their argument against the rationality of religious views? Because based on what you've said, I reconstructed what they could say about the rationality of religious views. So, rational propositions lead to good consequences.
Yeah.
First premise. Second premise. Religious propositions, accepting the religious propositions, lead to bad consequences.
Yeah.
Thus, accepting the religious propositions is irrational. So, so this is just that's what they say, as far as I understand, according to your talk, or not.
Yeah.
And if that is what they say, what exact premise do you reject from this argument? So, yeah, the first one.
I see. I can try. So, rationality is good, irrationality is bad.
Yeah.
The first statement, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And what is rational leads to good consequences. Yeah.
And science leads to good consequences.
Yeah.
And religion, as in that historical situation, demonstrated that religion leads to bad consequences.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Religion is bad, religion is irrational.
Yeah, yeah. So that is their argument, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you said, at the end of your talk, you said that we can reject their thought of new atheists, and I think that do you reject one of those premises, or do you, or you are doing something different?
No. I think that we must reject that statement. The statement that religion leads to bad consequences.
Oh, okay.
We have not only bad consequences in religion. Yeah, we have a lot of good things about religion, but new atheists denied all these things, and they looked just on that terrible thing that was there. And after, I think, after 2010, new atheists are not a popular movement in the world. There was wave of interest, and after that, they interested just researchers interested them. Yeah.
So.
Something like that.
Good. I think that the better strategy is to reject the first premise, that when they identify rationality, when they think that the pragmatical rationality exhausts rationality in general. So maybe we just can argue that they don't see a distinction between epistemic and pragmatic rationality, and we just can say that religion might even if religion is not has the consequences of accepting religious propositions are not so good, those propositions might be epistemically justified. And there is a very good reason to believe in them, and it is epistemically rational to believe in religious propositions, but not pragmatically rational. For example, even if we accept that the consequences are not very good. So this is also a very weak premise, and I think that...
I share your point here, but not in their system of mind, system of thought. I would try to reject this position with their own statements. Inside their own statements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kirill, please.
Thank you. So I have a kind of comment, some thoughts about the first basic principle, denial of supernatural reality, which you call naturalism. So there is a great, not discussion, but approval that there are some epistemic or meta-theoretical shaping principles working in science, such as simplicity, the idea that there are laws of nature and they are constant in time and space, that there is a causation between some realities, and many people now just say that these meta-theoretical shaping principles are were formed within theism and was supported by theism. And now, as I can see from your presentation, you atheists just think that this naturalism, so that everything could be explained from laws of nature, and the causation, the better explanation, the simplest explanation. They pretend to think that they just invented, no, I mean not new atheists, but those thinkers in Enlightenment. So, but I see that, and I believe that those principles they are explained by theism, first of all. And naturalists, they just accept them as brute facts, as I see. Perhaps I'm brutally mistaken, I don't know. I wonder if they just consider these principles to be an invention of some agent, intelligent agent, who is watching the universe, they are just not properly justified, as they would be justified within the theistic worldview. Is there any such questions to new atheists, and perhaps how they would reply if this question will be raised? Is raised.
Please reformulate your question.
Okay, I mean,
so long that, yeah.
So, first of all, the first question is about the fact.
Yeah.
If there is any question raised to a new atheist in this manner, in the terms of meta-theoretical shaping principles, which are explained within theism, and is not explained within naturalism. And how do you think what they will say in reply to this question?
Oh, I don't know. No idea. About some Enlightenment statements, they rejected that they have no a lot of philosophical basis, and they said that just I think Bertrand Russell is their renaissance.
Okay.
And I have no idea what they no, I have no idea.
So they are not involved in such a discussion.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sorry.
So that is not their problem. Their problem is to show to show everybody what terrible thing religion is. Something like this. Yeah.
Thank you, Vladimir Kirilovich, please.
Thank you. Well, I can only prove Valerius upshot that the new atheism is a self-contradictory outlook, but not only new atheism. Every real atheism is self-contradictory. Why? She properly stressed the moment that an atheist is one who believes in the non-existence of God, in spite of all his pretended scientism. And this phenomenon of atheistic faith is a very important thing. Well, I confine myself only to stock examples, which I refer to very often, that once one of the most renowned atheists of the 20th century entered the flu, converted not in confessional, but only into Aristotelian theism, that is deism. The atheistic Inquisition was immediately at work. And Richard Dawkins told that it was conditioned, his change of mind, not only by the dementia, but also by his sacrilege, by his betrayal of his former faith. And once upon a time, Daniel Dennett, in one interview to one newspaper, he acknowledged that sometimes he has something like mystic feelings of the unity with the universe. And he thought that that was a kind of revelation which descended to him, in contradiction to the statement that revelation is among the worst sources of knowledge. And that is a very important thing, and I believe that that situation, that theism is under further pressure now, one of the way out would be not so defense, but attacking the opponent. Because it is the most important thing to disclose that it is not a scientific worldview, but a kind of religious consciousness. Because some other forms of naturalistic consciousness, like agnosticism or skepticism, they are not religious in nature. But militant atheism is certainly religious consciousness, whether it's Inquisition and other means yes, of fighting against. And it is not only a metaphor that Dawkins is called an apostle of the new atheism, that is true. And we usually try to justify our faith and to prove that theism is not irrational, that it can be rational, but we must detach it, which is the just atheistic fideism. This is my opinion.
When I just began to research new atheism, I didn't agree with Weidner, but after finished my research, I absolutely agree with his ideas. Yeah, about new atheism, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, please.
Thank you for your talk. I think when we talk about basic principles of new atheism, there is one position that we should add to this list on your slide. It's as I think it's a basic position, center position of new atheism, and it's exclusive feature. It's a difference of in relation to the old atheism, classical atheism. It's thought that we should that new atheism is a position by default. That new atheists can be distinct from reflection about existence of God. That someone, for example, a child who was born is a new atheist, as they think. He have to find some evidences for existence of God, and maybe find some evidences for the atheism. But the new atheism don't need these evidences because, as by default, he's already a new atheist. It's a position of new atheists that I met. I think it's maybe explicit, maybe implicit, but it's in all these positions they suppose that it is right. So do you think how it influences on your reasoning and maybe it is a basic principle on which the problem of evidentialism is not so serious for them, or maybe not.
I don't think that this characteristic is a feature, basic principle of new atheism. I don't think so, and I have never met a position like this.
It's also called non-theist sometimes. So I suppose you said this term, non-theist or anti-theist. So it's very close to it.
Anti-theism?
Yeah.
I suppose not so close.
They're trying to not to be involved in metaphysical discussion. They try to say, I don't believe in God, but don't involve me into your metaphysics. I don't want to discuss it.
They have so with the stranger who is one of the new atheists wrote a big book God as a hypothesis, something like this, and Dawkins have and Dawkins in his book God's Delusion also denied proofs for existence of God. There is a metaphysics in their thoughts, but it wasn't my aim to demonstrate now, because it is very usual. It is very usual for research to research these points of new atheism. Sometimes.
Okay, thank you. I would add to this list one topic is believing in almighty evolution. This is a very important topic.
Yeah, maybe. Not for Harris, I think. But for Dawkins, I didn't absolutely.
Evolution, which explains everything.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If we have no question. Okay, yes. Please, sure.
Yeah, okay. Also a comment on what you said, Kirill. I think what characterizes the new atheists is that only one is a philosopher, Dennett, I believe.
Yeah.
And they are lacking some meta-theoretical considerations. What I've read from Dawkins or Harris or Hitchens, it's the level of the arguments is not. It's not a very high one, and they're not reflecting on their thoughts. There's no meta theory item, and this sometimes even makes me a bit angry when if I read Mackey, I know this is really good stuff and good thoughts, and what they're doing is, Dawkins saying the arguments for the existence of God are unsound, and I'm like, well, 2 pages, how can you say so? And just as a comment, and I think one feature might be, but it's not unique to the new atheists, that it's a functional critique of religion. So what you repeat it a lot of times, there are bad consequences or outcomes from religion. So what I've done, like Marx or Freud or Feuerbach said, religion is bad, can't be true, or theism can't be true because the practice of religion leads to bad outcomes. But this obviously isn't new, but you said it so often, so I think it should maybe appear on the list.
They have no high philosophical argumentation, but I think that we must research this movement because that's the most modern form of atheism, of some naturalism, maybe. So, and it has very sharp critic of religion. So,
it's a very influential one, right? So it's
very influential.
And, yes.
Followers of atheism, something like atheism plus. They have they absolutely have no philosophical argumentation, absolutely no. But they said that, and they said that they are followers of new atheism.
So, just a short, why they say that is because they believe it's enough with scientific reasons. You don't have to get into philosophy or anything. It's just by using scientific reasons you can show that there is no God. I mean, that's just basic. So of course you don't have to care about philosophy, as long as philosophy isn't part of science, which they don't think. So in a way they're consistent. But of course that's the problem for the old atheists that think that the best arguments aren't and that are built for scientific reasons. So it's not surprising they don't like philosophy.
So, Valeria, thank you very much. Well, now it's time for Stenmark.
Let's see if you can stay.
And his speech, secular worldviews and atheism. So, Michael,
Thank you.
please.
Yes, I'll change the title a little bit. And here is a slightly revised version of that paper. So please take lunch.
You can discuss the whole thing.
Yeah, so it should be enough for all of you to get one copy.
Yeah, there is a short version and full version.
Yeah,
Okay.
depends on how tired you are. You can, if you're very tired, you can take the short version.
You are tired.
Well, you can take both. I don't know if they're consistent with each other, actually. There's a spare copy here, I think, isn't it? Here's the leads the short
Almost frightening.
Oh,
No. We'll prepare a short question.
okay. What I tried to do in this paper was actually trying to do two things. The first one was just to think about what kind of worldview would atheism be an expression of, and then I was thinking, well, and then I would get on to the issue about the rationality. But then I got it too much entangled in the first issue, so I didn't really get to the discussion about the rational grounds for it. But that's how it is with research, isn't it? You don't quite know what you're doing. That's research. Well, anyway, so what I'm trying to say here is that I don't think that atheism as such is a worldview, but I think that it's necessary for an atheist to incorporate their atheistic stance within a worldview. And I chose the term secular worldview for that. So I'm arguing that atheists have to have a secular worldview, but there is more than one option available to them. And I think that in the rhetoric especially, these are confused. So it sounds like there is just one option. But I think there's two. In fact, I think there is many more. And if you're interested, you can read John Gray's book. He's talking about 7 different forms. I don't know if that's, I mean, you can cut it in many different ways. But anyway, there's at least 2. That's what I argue for in this paper. And there's a tension between them. So that's what I'm doing. So the first thing I'm going over is that I reject atheism as a form of non-ism. I'm just saying that it's not appropriate to think of atheists as people who lack belief in God or gods. For the simple reason that we can't make a distinction between atheism and agnosticism if we go with that. So we need to have something more substantial. It could still be a negative claim, and that's what I've been suggesting then when I talk about minimal atheism on the second page there, that it is the belief that there is no God or gods. So that's what I take atheism to be. And then I continue on page 3 there saying that if we reject that non-ism is equivalent to atheism, it does not automatically follow that atheism as unbelief is a worldview. I think this is correct in the sense that there is more than one worldview option available to atheists. They can combine this negative belief that there is no God or gods with different positive beliefs about the nature of reality and our place in it. However, I will claim that it's wrong in the sense we should not think that atheists could avoid, if they like, adopting consciously or unconsciously one or another of these options. They, like everyone else, in the way of thinking, talking, acting, unavoidably express a worldview of some kind. And then you have my take on what a worldview is. But I'll leave that for later discussion anyway. So what I'm saying then, when we turn to page 4 there, is that atheists unavoidably need to incorporate their atheism in a broader secular construal or outlook on life. But they are not alone in being secular in this sense. In addition, agnostics, or more exactly, those of them who are not religious, have to have a secular worldview. So it's not the case that all secular worldviews are atheistic. I think they're also agnostic, the secular worldviews, and that's an important thing to keep in mind, although it's not central for this paper. Either way, we can distinguish between religious and secular worldviews or ways of life. So, if you just look at the secular worldview, then in the first part it denies what I take religious worldview to be. It denies or remain agnostic about the existence of a transcendent, divine, or sacred dimension of reality, and affirm that reality has a different makeup. And it is this structure that is important for how we understand and live our lives. And then I'd say that, of course, it's the theistic worldviews that are the main opponent in the kind of discussion we're having in the West anyway. And then I'll move on to my main concern here. What would then a secular worldview look like? What are the core options available today for an atheist? So in what follows, I distinguish between two options: naturalism and secular humanism, and I offer a rational reconstruction of them because I think they aren't always clearly kept apart. Start with naturalism then. A naturalistic worldview would probably be the primary alternative to the majority of philosophers and scientists who are atheists. And I take the basic idea of this worldview to be something along the following lines, and that's N1. There is nothing beyond or beside nature of the natural order, and consequently everything that exists is part of nature. Nature is all there is and ever will be. Since God, according to theism, is the creator and sustainer of the natural order, N1 entails the rejection of this outlook on life. Naturalism entails atheism, and hence is incompatible with agnosticism. However, there might be gods and deities immanent in the natural order, as well as spirits, angels, and processes such as reincarnation and karma, and these they reject as well. But the problem here is that they seem to reject more things than this, because we have to think about how restrictive is this notion, nature, or naturalistic world. So then we come to the next section there. What about those things that people take to be natural parts of the everyday human world, such as person, intentionality, consciousness, agency, belief, reason, and so forth? Are they proper part of the natural order? Why is a naturalist like Kim asking the question, what is about intentionality and consciousness or content that requires them to be naturalized? Why aren't they perfectly naturalistic as they are? People in general arguably take it for granted that things like these are part of the furniture of the world. So there is a significant difference between the natural world and the naturalistic world. And I think that the reason why these things are not perfectly naturalistic as they are is that a defining feature of naturalism is the pride of place that naturalism grants science. As the naturalistic philosopher Sellers is famous for saying, science is the measure of all things. Hence, atheists that privilege science or take science as their only guide to reality embrace a naturalistic worldview. But that entails that N1 is not precise enough to capture the core idea of naturalism. What we need is something along the following line, and that's what SN1. There is nothing beyond or beside scientific nature or the natural order discovered by the sciences, and consequently, everything that exists is part of scientific nature. Natural in the natural world means essentially the same as natural in the natural sciences. Hence, the answer to the question why the things, properties, or relations that words like person, the self, intentionality, consciousness, belief, responsibility, and value refers to why they need to be naturalized, is that these phenomena don't line up neatly with any facts of the kind uncovered by science. They are different, difficult to locate in the third-person world ontology of the science. Philosophers have called this the location problem or the placement problem. Now I'll skip a section there. The conviction that science is the measure of all things not merely contains an ontology that we've just been talking about, nature is scientific nature, but also an epistemology. Hume says that the core naturalistic doctrine seems to be something like this. Scientific method is the only method to acquire knowledge or reliable information in all spheres, including philosophy. And then I give some more examples of this. Hence, SN1 has an epistemic companion, and that I call SN2. The only kind of genuine knowledge or understanding we can have is the one provided by science. And science sets also the standard for justified belief. And I call this position epistemic exclusivism. The form of naturalism that S1 and SN2 entails has been called scientific naturalism, scientism, or scientific atheism. But since science is taken to be the arbitrary of all reality, naturalists will adopt an attitude of skepticism toward all things and properties people believe exist, which cannot be discovered and measured by science. It is, after all, our exclusive guide to reality. Hence, this attitude goes far beyond the skepticism against the supernatural. This means that the naturalists basically have two options when it comes to something which doesn't appear to be part of science. Either the practice of phenomena must be redescribed, reduced, or transformed into science. That is the naturalization problem strategy. Or it must be explained away by science and treated as fiction. That is, either taken as helpful but illusory beliefs, or abandoned altogether. That's the elimination strategy. And then I take an example where I pick up one thing that is very important for understanding secular humanism, namely the humanities. And I give one example of a naturalist, scientific naturalist here, that goes with a naturalization strategy, and I give another example that goes with the elimination strategy. So either one of which strategy one is using here, and then now at the bottom of the page, a remarkable gap opens between, on the one hand, the everyday life world that many of us simply take for granted, and the humanities, and on the other hand, the naturalistic worldview that these atheists embrace. Now, this worries some naturalists who are inclined to think that the world of persons, intentionality, and agency, and so forth, is real and cannot be reduced to the world of the natural sciences. And that they matter for how we should understand and live our lives as secular people. Now, these atheists want to develop a more liberal naturalistic worldview, or simply liberal naturalism. Now, and here's the tricky issue. The tricky question here is how liberal such a worldview can be and still be a form of naturalism. The broad contours of the alternative ontology seems reasonably clear, namely LN1. The notion of nature must be extended beyond scientific nature in order to fully capture social reality, mental events, and normative dimensions of human life. But, and this is my word, but if you believe these things, why call yourself a naturalist at all? Descartes and MacArthur give the answer that naturalist entails the rejection of supernatural entities. And it's this, and only that, ontological commitment is something that both the scientific and the liberal naturalists have in common. But is this enough? Now, I'm in two minds about this, so we'll see what it takes. I do not think so, because one could reject theism and supernaturalism without giving science a special place in one's life. For this reason, I think we should call Caro or MacArthur's view simply extended atheism. Now, of course, and here's the second thought. Another option, of course, would be to simply accept what they're saying and call this generic naturalism. If so, we can distinguish between scientific atheists and humanistic atheists, and call the secular worldview these people embrace scientific naturalism, and instead label the second humanistic naturalism, instead of labeling it secular humanism. Now, Again, my worry with this terminology is that in the philosophical literature that I read anyway, should have added that perhaps, naturalism is deeply intertwined with the natural sciences, whereas humanism, I will argue, is firmly rooted in humanities. Well, roughly, and we can either call it an extended atheism or generic naturalism. That is the view that atheists believe that there are no God who created and sustained nature, and no God or other supernatural entities such as spirits or ghosts, of processes such as reincarnation and karma in nature. And here is something we can come back to, which I think is interesting. I tend to think that supernaturalism, I have a more restricted notion there than I think some of you have. I tend to think of that as gods and entities, spirits and ghosts that are within the natural order, so to say. That's what I call supernatural. Whereas I think if you believe in God, you believe that God is the ground of the natural order. And that is something else. And you can believe in both of these things if you want, or just one of them. So you can just come back to that if that's a smart way of making that distinction. Maybe it comes back to that supernaturalism in Swedish is not a good term. So maybe I'll just try to save theism from the faith of supernaturalism. Who knows? How to specify the alternative. So that's the ontology then. How to specify the alternative epistemology of liberal naturalism is also tricky. Now, they say that they want to accept other forms of knowledge than scientific knowledge. But then I try to say that if they want to stay in the naturalistic camp, I think they at least have to say that science is the paradigm example of knowledge and rationality, and as such give a much more reliable form of knowledge and justified belief than other sources can do. So I think they have to embrace what I call epistemic privileges, and that's the LN2. Science gives us the best and most reliable form of knowledge or understanding we can have, and also sets the prime standard for justified belief. On this account, liberal naturalists must still privilege science to remain naturalists. They must think that a secular construal of human life and flourishing should be guided by, but not necessarily like scientific naturalists believe, derived from science. And then I just try to give a fast summary of what naturalism is. So I take naturalism is roughly the secular worldview that rejects theism and supernaturalism and takes science as the essential or only guide for understanding the world we live in and are a part of, and for how we should live our lives. Science is the measure of all things. So as an atheist, one should start with science, privilege it, and then see what beliefs and attitudes in morality, politics, everyday life, and so forth one must reject, revise, or retain as they are when developing a secular worldview. That is to say, all naturalists on this construal think that science is of prime importance or outmost importance for the construal of the secular way of life. Now, to the next question, which we kind of hinted at when we were talking about liberal naturalism. That is, when is an atheist best described as a humanist rather than a naturalist? And because I started thinking about this, I didn't never get to the last section about the rationality. Sorry for this, but I think it's an important question here. It's a difficult question to answer this question. Nevertheless, it is quite clear that the starting point of secular humanism is humanism rather than science or scientism. What is then humanism? Just like naturalism, it could mean several different things. The central ingredients, I believe, is a particular view of human nature, certain core values, and emphasis on the importance of humanities and the social sciences. Let me first say something about humanism in general before I try to explicate what secular humanism would be against this background. So humanism is a mood of thought and action in which human interest, values, and dignity predominates. So humanists emphasize the value, dignity, agency, and uniqueness of human being and human life, and the essential product of that uniqueness, culture. And then I'll just skip a little bit here and move on to page 11, so we have time to discuss with this as well. And there I start by saying I think that the idea of human dignity and freedom are of prime importance in humanism. That's the kind of core of humanism. So the humanistic stance affirms that human beings possess a special intrinsic value to the humanity, and as such are worthy of respect simply because they are human beings. So humanists focus on the centrality of humanity and human persons' unique status among beings in general. And humanists are for this reason suspicious of all attempts, and goes in two directions here, in all attempts to reduce human beings to physical things or to instruments of the divine will, in order to protect human agency and dignity. So, go further down. What all of this seems to boil down to is that the basic notion of humanists, in contrast to naturalists, is not nature, but culture. They strongly emphasize human uniqueness and dignity, and the moral value that flows from this commitment, and the importance of an eye-to-eye or a person-to-person perspective on other humans. I skipped that part, but it's, you can look at it afterwards. So roughly, I take these are essential elements of humanism. So H1 is human experience, intentions, and actions should be prioritized and distinguished from the behavior of objects of physical particles. H2, moral values exist and are important, especially so the moral commitment that all humans have the same intrinsic worth and thus possess the same liberties. And H3, culture goes beyond nature and is of a different kind, and therefore central features are not detectable by the sciences. And H4, the humanities offers a different kind of knowledge and understanding, that is what I call interpersonal knowledge, than do the sciences. A knowledge that might even be more valuable than what the sciences provide us with, that is a thing or third person knowledge. Since this knowledge arises from our unique capacity of seeing each other eye to eye, or as persons and not as objects. Claim H4, which is a form of epistemic pluralism, entails a rejection of both epistemic inclusivism, expressed in SN2, and epistemic privilege, expressed in LN2. So humanism, we could say, expresses a worldview that is consistent with science, but not guided by science, as in liberal naturalism, or derived from science, as in scientific naturalism. It is guided by belief in human freedom and dignity instead, and by the priority of culture above nature in understanding human life and its significance. The consistency with science thesis is a part of humanism, but we need to take into account that it comes with an important qualifier, namely, granted that science stays within its proper domain of inquiry. Humanists reject all forms of scientist or scientific expansionism, and then I give a couple of examples. And then last section on 12. Against this background, we can understand why Stephen LeDroux writes that popular atheism today is becoming more and more indistinguishable from scientism and the drive to secure the cognitive, moral, and ultimate political authority of the natural sciences, and thus betray a long tradition of humanistic atheism, derived from Enlightenment moral, socio-political critique, and later socialist projects. So LeDroux maintains there is a tension within the secular movement between scientific atheism and humanistic atheism, which, I argue, is related to the tension between scientists and humanists. So humanistic atheists reject the hegemony of science and base their secular outlook on other sources of knowledge and justification than those provided by the sciences, and in particular on the idea of human uniqueness and human dignity. If we understand, and I'll skip a paragraph here, if we understand humanism in this way, it is compatible with many, but far from all forms of religion. So far we have said things about humanities that many religions would accept. So we need something more to get it into secular humanism. So let's consider next what is needed for it to become secular humanism. That is a worldview that atheists could accept instead of naturalism. Minimally speaking, what would get secular humanists by simply adding minimal atheism or extended atheism to H1 to H4 But I think there is more to it than this. William James Wright, when one asks to characterize the life of religion in the broadest and most general possible terms, one might say that it consists of the belief that there is an unseen order and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto. Secular humanists deny this and find our supreme good or harmony not with the divine order but with the human order, in accordance with the idea that we as humanity, not God, an unseen order, for that matter we as individuals, are the source of all values.
This is the fall of
values. Yeah. Hence, secular humanists add to humanism something along these lines. So SM1, humanity is the source of all values and not God or an unseen order. And consequently, human dignity is not God-given. We are not created in the image of God, but flows from the unique kind of being we exemplify from our humanity. We should also add that humanists believe that our lives can have meaning without it being bestowed by God or by being grounded in science. The existence of values in SM1 and of meaning, I'll come to that, SM2, are independent of both the divine order and the naturalistic order that science can discover. Perhaps we can say that the humanists believe that values and meaning are part of the natural world, even if they should turn out to be no part of the naturalistic world. That is, even if they cannot be naturalized. So roughly SM2, while there is no meaning to the existence of nature and life, there is no cosmic meaning, our human life can still have meaning, and this is so irrespectively of whether this meaning can be bestowed on life by God or by science. And I take SM1 and SM2 to be intrinsic elements of secular humanism, and those are things that makes them secular. And then I give you a definition there of secular. Well, definition is to say too much. It's just to pick up some of the core elements of what secular is. It's roughly the atheistic worldview that rejects theism and supernaturalism, which is informed by science, but reject its hegemony and emphasizing instead the importance of the humanities in understanding human life and its significance, and is guided by belief in human dignity and freedom. Humanity, not science, is the measure of all things. Lastly, and to avoid any misunderstanding, I do not deny that secular humanists could and frequently do assume that science is incompatible with science. My point is that, contrary to the naturalist, their secular worldview does not flow out of, doesn't find its basic building block in, or is constrained to what science says reality is and basically nothing more. Secular humanists certainly respect and are impressed by science, but they do not believe that science is the measure of all things. It is we, as a community of persons, who are that. Secular humanists' prime charge is therefore that religion is compatible with human dignity, equality, or liberty, or at least, which is more common, that religion tends to undermine those value commitments. But, and this I think is important to emphasize, to the extent that science does the same, they are skeptical of science as well. Now, then I was trying to get over a little bit to the epistemology here, so I'll say a few things about that. The first thing I tried to raise in section 5 is that I think it's important to see that the issue is not just evidential, it has important existential aspects as well, and I used Thomas Nagel to get this out. So he, in one of his books, talks about the fear of religion. What he has in mind is not to justify criticism of some form of religion or religious institutions. He instead talks about something much deeper, namely the fear of religion itself. I speak from experience, being strongly subject to this fear myself. I want atheism to be true, and I'm made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It is that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Now, if Nagel is right, the choice of worldview that atheism, theism, and agnosticism exemplify is not merely about evidential grounds one has for one's belief, and how certain one is that one is correct, but also about one's emotional and existential stance. and that I just tried to make a scheme for capturing these things. And Nagel's position is in space 1. Now we'll move to the other side and see what I say about the other options here. But of course there are atheists that would be in position 2 and 3 as well. Now, I'm on 70, sorry for this. Now, I want to stress, and here is the connection to the epistemic stance. Nagel's fear of religion relates to his epistemic stance. He wants, as we have seen, atheism to be true, and is made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people he knows are religious believers. He believes that there is no God, but is uncertain whether his atheism is correct. It is a live option for him that God, unfortunately, could exist. Now, other atheists, as we all know, like Richard Dawkins, thinks that God almost certainly does not exist. The likelihood that God exists is very low. Rosenberg goes one step further and do not think that atheists should treat theism as a serious alternative at all. They should have moved beyond that point by now, and I quote him, "We know the truth." So we can conclude that the epistemic confidence of the degree of conviction that atheists have that their beliefs are true varies. And then I didn't get to the point that I was after in this section. What I'm trying to say is that you can only have fear of religion if theism is a live option. If you know that God don't exist, the fear factor is not there. So that was, I didn't get that into the paper, but that was where I was going. So to the epistemic, the fear of religion has a relationship to the epistemic confidence that one has. And then it also has an impact on the view of rational disagreement, how one is thinking about the disagreement with agnostics and theists. So Nagel, as we have seen, is an example William Rowe would call a friendly atheist. So he, just like Rowe, thinks that it's rational for intelligent and well-informed people today to disagree with atheists. Whereas Dawkins and Rosenberg, on the other hand, are, in Rowe's terminology, unfriendly atheists. Not that they could not be friends with atheists, with theists or religious believers in the social sense, but that they, in the intellectual sense, assume that these people, even those of them who are intelligent and well-informed, is irrational in not being atheists. Now, just try to close this up here. Now, notice though, now we'll come to the evidence thing here. Notice though that what evidence for atheism or against theism that is appropriate to use is heavily shaped by whether atheists embrace naturalism or secular humanism. Here it matters for the evidence. So naturalists have more or less to stick to the evidence that science can produce because science is the measure of all things. A secular humanist like Rowe would have problems with this line of arguing. He writes that if it was a keen sense of the lack of God's presence in his life, the existence of meaningless evil and horrible suffering in the world, along with the conviction that morality need not be grounded in God's nature, that were the decisive evidence in his case. However, these existential and philosophical arguments and evidence are of a different sort and are to be not within the purview of science. So they would not be there for a naturalist to use. And then the very, very close last thing I read, that's the second half on page 19 here. Now, this means that there is a danger that secular people who ground their atheism merely on science are exposed to, is that if some form of theistic religion turn out to be compatible with science, something like atheists like Michael Ruse and Elliot Soberg argue for, their atheism is completely evidentially undermined. In this way, secular humanists are in a better position than naturalists because their evidence base contains not only scientific reasons and beliefs, they can just as well ground their rejection of theism and religion on non-scientific reasons of the sort that, for instance, philosophical inquiry might deliver. So it matters whether when we describe atheism, whether you embrace secular humanism and naturalism, And it will affect the evidence base you can use when you argue against theism or any other religion. Thank you.
Colleagues who have some question?
Maybe I can start.
Please, Weidner.
Yeah, thank you very much for this talk. It was very interesting, seriously, very interesting. And I just have one comment on in one of the fragments, I don't remember where exactly, you discussed the idea that there are some features of reality which are not grasped by scientific inquiry, like consciousness, intentionality, and all those things. And you say that it somehow contradicts to the let's say that it contradicts to, well, I'm not sure whether I'll use those terms correct in the case of your distinctions, but it contradicts to some form of naturalism, or maybe I would put it physicalism, but that something is physical, and for example, which is and the physical is the definition of physical somehow is connected with the physical sciences, and if those features of reality are not grasped in physics, for example, like consciousness and phenomenal consciousness, then then this kind of naturalism is false. But I think that it would be useful to introduce here a weak version of physicalism, which is the idea that many physicalists, they believe that everything is not physical ontologically, that not all the things they have the physical ontological nature, but that they depend on physical.
Yeah.
Like supervene on
Yes.
on physical,
Yes.
so all those properties. And so that was the first comment. I'm not sure.
Well, can I just respond to that? I think what you're saying is compatible with what I'm writing. Is that these people think that consciousness can be naturalized. So I'm just talking prima facie here, that things that appear to not be within the grasp of the natural sciences should a naturalist initially be very skeptical of, because it's not part of what science has discovered. So they either have to go one way of naturalizing it, or they have to eliminate it, so to say. So I'm not saying that a naturalist couldn't naturalize consciousness. I'm not taking a stand on that. I'm just saying that they have a skepticism here that a humanist wouldn't have. It would be a kind of default position of the humanist to take that for granted, that the consciousness exists, and self-consciousness and personhood and all these things. But so they would have a built-in skepticism that they could overcome by two kinds of strategies.
So it could be naturalized. There are two ways of how it could be naturalized that you consider. The first way is that they can reduce all those which are prima facie non-physical properties to some physical properties, or they can say that there are no such properties, for example. And these are two strategies of how they can do it. But these strategies are based on an epistemic idea of naturalism, so that's only physical. Yeah. So.
But here's also a tricky thing with talking about naturalism, and that is, should you say that naturalism is physicalism, or should you? I'm trying to make it a little broader. I'm trying to say that natural here is the natural sciences. So I'm just not trying to leave it a little more open than physicalism.
Yeah, and maybe it would be useful, but I'm sure you know about this work by Daniel Stolger, which is called Physicalism. This is one of the greatest, maybe contemporary books on physicalism, where he explores the logical space that physicalism could, where physicalism could go. It's just so good. And I had another comment about your classification, that it would be very useful for me to see. So I've just sketched the help me, tablica. Yeah, the table. I'm sorry. I've sketched the table. What are the possible views?
Okay.
So, so what we can adopt and with the logical relations between them. And if you do that with all what you say, and then, for example, the person who accepts that there is supernatural reality believes that they're physical, but he doesn't believe that that rationality is exhausted by natural sciences, and he believes that persons are special, and he believes that humanities are not that humanities could be explained in natural science expressions. So this is the view which I call this way, and it would be very useful for me, for example, as a reader, to see this table with all those possible views, which logically coherent possible views. So,
Okay.
yes, that would be perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Any questions, please?
So I have two questions, but maybe they are interconnected. I don't know myself. So first question is on the nature of atheism. The question is very easy.
Thank you. I want to have these questions.
If the atheism has just one nature, I mean, you said that atheism could be a part of different worldviews,
Yeah.
but it is not a worldview on its own.
Yeah, that's what.
But my question is whether atheism, as a part of different worldviews, still would have one nature, or scientific atheism or scientist atheism and humanist atheism itself are very different things. Yeah, so this is the first question. And the second one is what the existential part or part of atheism, motivation for atheism, what it reveal about the nature of atheism. What does it reveal about the nature of atheism? Yeah. Could we say that the true nature of atheism is here, but not in such statements as this, if some scientist atheism or humanist atheism, maybe there's some common core which lies in the existential part.
We'll start with the second one. I'm inclined to think that it's not just existential on the atheist side, it's just as existential on the theist side. It's not just a theoretical issue how to think about this. It's really deeply engaged what the kind of beings we are and want to be and how we want the world to be. So I think that is a problem sometimes in this discussion, although it's hard to really say exactly what the existential is, but I'm inclined to think that maybe it's the real nature of the discussion. But I agree with Nagel that sometimes we must pull up ourselves up and really wonder what is the truth too. I think it matters, and we should pay more attention to it. And one thing that I didn't read through here is Kitcher. Kitcher is critical of the new atheists because he thinks that the only way for atheists to win, to get a purely secular culture, is that atheism must offer a secular substitute when it comes to the existential and emotional needs that religion satisfy. So he actually has a very interesting take on that, where he is talking about that if atheism should be successful, it must also not just answer the intellectual or theoretical question, it must provide a substitute, a secular substitute, when it comes to existential and emotional issues, or needs that religion have for generations been able to address. So he thinks there's a basic flaw in the new atheist there. The first one I didn't quite get. I mean, the scientific atheism and the naturalistic atheism are very different. But that is not, I take, due to the fact that they embrace minimal atheism, that they deny that God exists. It is due to the fact that they fill up the world with different kinds of understanding of the structure. One starting from the outside in, looking for what science can provide, the other starting from the human point of view. And if you do that, you will end up differently in your emphasis, I think. So it's due to other facts than their atheism, and that's why I don't think atheism in itself, or at least these days I don't think that. I might change my mind, but I don't think atheism is a worldview, but it could be given different expressions. And I think also like Ray here, that I wanted to do that, but I wasn't able to do it. Gray thinks that, and he might be right, Gray thinks that humanism is the last thing left of theism that the atheists aren't ready to reject. But he thinks that an atheist should actually reject humanism, because that's part of the theistic package. So that's a very, very interesting view that he's having. But I didn't have time to try to spell that out. Because that's another kind of, if you want to keep the humanism, do you need to ground it in a theistic understanding of the world?
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you. Well, I have one small, purely linguistical question. In the combination of words used by you, secular humanism. What is the significance of the adjective secular? I ask about that because maybe you have in mind some other shape of humanism, which is not secular. For example, is it clerical humanism or religious humanism or what?
Yeah, you're right. I have in mind religious humanism. That's why I say that 1, 2, 4 are compatible.
What do you mean by secular in this combination of the words?
The secular is that it's, well, the secular part here is that a precondition is that you have to accept atheism or agnosticism when you don't in any way want to live a religious life. Those are preconditions for it to become secular. If I had another, the option here is you have atheism and you have agnosticism. And I'm claiming that none of those are sufficient to make it into a worldview. But then I want to have another term. I have religious worldviews, but then I need another term. And it would be, and I don't want to use non-religious worldviews. And then I pick secular. So I'm open to pick something else if you have a good idea what I should pick. But it's just a matter of finding a terminology where you can distinguish religious worldviews from other worldviews. And then I use secular for that.
Yes, I understand, but I'd like to amplify. Is there any non-secular humanism?
Yes, if it's possible for religious
how
humanism.
You would designate it in your terms? Non-secular humanism.
Well, it would be to accept. In a negative way, it would be to accept the 1 to 4 that I'm saying of humanism and reject the SN1 and SN2, the one that I say specific about secular humanism, and replace them with something else. And so I would think that there are forms of religion where you can talk about religious humanism that you can have instead there if you wanted to.
Then you admit such a notion as religious humanism?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's the way it's structured. But if you have any good ideas what to use instead, that's. It's just that I want to have a contrast here to religious, and a subgroup of that is theistic, and then I want people to call the other worldviews something else, and not just a negation.
Okay, thanks. Veronica, please.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting paper. One question back to chapter 5 is, do you think that a scientific naturalist could come, it's the last, let's say absatz, a scientific naturalist who is an evidentialist could come to the conclusion that theism is true based on evidence if the evidence he or she can use is only evidence derived by science, and science has only evidence which excludes God as an explanation of anything. So,
well, no, there must be scientific reasons to believe that there is a God for them to change. Otherwise, the only rational position for them would be to be agnostic.
yes. And do you think there are any scientific reasons to come to the conclusion that theism is right? If these reasons, like theistic.
Well, I think there are arguments that would contain scientific premises.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see that you can find an argument that merely uses scientific premises. So I think fine-tuning, for instance, would be something that would contain scientific premises. But I'm not sure you can develop that without relying on certain philosophical premises.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can get a pure scientific argument.
Yeah. I agree. So I would think like if a scientific naturalist is consistent and says the only premises I use are scientific, derived, and it's only scientific evidence, there's no way to come to the conclusion that theism is true. If I don't use philosophical reasons, metaphysical assumptions.
Yeah. So, but I would say the great challenge for them is that they probably, and I think Sober and Michael Lewis are correct here, that it's impossible to show that science and religion are incompatible. Mm-hmm. And then you lose your whole ground for atheism. Then you must be an agnostic. Mm-hmm. So you really expose yourself, rather, I would say, if you embrace scientific naturalism. Mm-hmm. Because then you stand or fall with whether you have scientific evidence against God's existence. Mm-hmm. And I don't see how you can formulate the problem of evil even. Mm-hmm. As a purely scientific argument. It draws on value commitments. So you end up in a very tricky situation. So I would naturally think that if you're a scientific atheist, you should actually be an agnostic.
Okay, thanks. And please.
I have a two-part question. So on page 10, you describe natural. You describe first point of view that is an indifferent world of objects, absolutely impersonal, that doesn't care about personality or how the world should be. The world just is. Is that right?
Let's see what I'm saying. It's on page 10. Let's just yeah. Well, yes. So here's a statement from somebody that don't think that persons can be naturalized. So this is a view saying, well, you can't naturalize persons. It's not a concept with a reference that is capable of being understood by purely scientific means. And for that reason, the basis for humanism is different from the basis of scientific naturalism. But then, of course, you can have scientific naturalists that deny that and say, yeah, sure, persons can be naturalized. And if you're successful in that, you get persons into scientific naturalism as well.
And that is where my second question comes from. So, secular humanists, they believe that there is that dignity, equality, and liberty, they have some sort of meaning. That, however, could you tell us where do they come from? Because these things that they have any value, that this is not an obvious matter to explain.
I think here it is. This whole idea comes from the Renaissance and forward. It comes from a theistic background, but it's just kept in later in secular society as an self-evident premises. But of course, for a secular humanist to come to his grounds and reason, he needs to be able to provide us with reasons why we should accept the human dignity and human freedom here. So all I'm saying that is the kind of starting point, the kind of things they take as paradigmatically, and they are not ready to. But phrase it this way. I would say a secular humanist that realizes that he or she cannot justify her humanism in terms of generic naturalism should become a theist. So that would be the natural way to go. It wouldn't be the other, because the humanistic part is an intrinsic element in the worldview. So they would be easier. They would be easier to convince. I think, rationally speaking, they should be easier to convince to the theistic camp than to the naturalistic camp. So I would say, yeah, they take it as a self-evident, pretty much, that things are, and I would agree with you that you have to justify that.
So they probably don't have a starting point, because I really doubt that they can base their philosophy on Thomas More or Montaigne, because these people, I really doubt they can be used, their works can be used as a starting point for secular humanists, because they do not support and maybe somehow defy these things that they find valuable. Because their secular humanism cannot start within humanism as a whole, because it is a fractured movement as well.
Well, I think that's a bit hard on them to say that. I think as I see it, they kind of start out in realizing the face-to-face meeting individuals. And perhaps you can add the principle of plurality and certain things, and you could say that it's rational to hold this unless there are grounds for rejecting it. And from that they start, so to say. I mean, you can criticize all these views, I'm not saying that, but I think they could start there.
Paul, please, shortly. Yes. On page 11, you are giving an important statement about humanism, secular humanism. You write, I quote you, humanism focuses on the centrality of humanity and human person's unique status among beings and God. And humanists are, for this reason, suspicious of all attempts to reduce human beings to physical things or to instruments of the divine will. Yeah. I wonder whether this suspicion of naturalistic reduction or of theological reduction is the outcome of humanism or the cause of secular humanism. I mean, some humanists could have had bad experiences of being described by scientists just like chunk of matters, or being described by theologians as instruments of God's will. And as a consequence, they decide to protect themselves against theological reduction and scientific reduction. Of course, you can deny that the doctrine that God is the first cause reduces or the human dignity. Okay, but suppose that someone does not want to be considered as a secondary cause, but as the sole and unique cause of his own dignity, he would have a reason to become secular humanist. That those are not these suspicions are not the outcomes of secular humanism, but the sources.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be that. I think that, I mean, thinking historically about it, humanism first comes as a reaction to ideas about just ignoring human autonomy and just submitting to the divine will. That's the kind of Renaissance background that comes. So, and for that reason, I'm saying not all religions are compatible with humanism, I think. Or not all forms of religions are compatible with that. And I think this second part, these attempts to reduce human beings to physical things, comes from the other examples that I was giving, where these anthropologists were writing about the Darwinian worldview and contrasting it with the humanistic worldview, and say there's tensions here. We're not that it's not really. So there's and that's something that comes much later when science has been very successful. It's really, you feel the hegemony of science is kind of, and then the humanists kind of start to get worried. This can crush the humanistic worldview. So I think they have different historical roots. But it could be like you're saying as well, for an individual secular humanist. But from a historical angle, I think they have different trajectories.
And you can have a kind of secular, theistic humanism. For example, Voltaire or Jefferson, they just need a God in order to warrant the dignity of all mankind. All men are created equal, and then God is not useful anymore.
I'm the theism, I'm giving a very minimal definition of a theistic worldview here. So it just depends on how robust and how much you build that out as well.
But it is a work of brilliance. This classification is wonderful. It's not only an interpretation.
Now it's time for coffee break. It's on the third floor. Number of room, yes, third floor, number of room 314. 314. Yes, please. I will show you the way.
And you'll look at the computer.
Yes, I will know.